Well, last night we went through the book of Genesis, and that was only 50 chapters. Tonight we're going through 38 books.
Whoa.
I know that what we're going to do with those books is overview them. That's what we're trying to do in this series. We're not trying to hit all the low points, we're trying to get in the high points. I went up in the air today and flew over your area. I got to see it from a perspective I don't normally get to see your area. And I saw things differently than I would see them from the ground. That's what we're doing with this overview. So I will be referring to books. I'll be telling you we're going to cover this section tonight, but I'm not going to be reading from particular texts or asking you to turn in your Bibles to those, because what I want you to see in this greatest story that has ever been told is how God is working from the very beginning of creation all the way through to the end of the Bible to bring about things that affect you and me in our daily lives. We left last night Joseph, mummified, having asked for a promise from his people that they would not leave his bones in Egypt when they left. Now, you need to know that at the time he said that, it probably wasn't very understandable to his people, because they had it pretty good. Pharaoh loved Joseph. He had made him second in command in the nation. And the Israelites were living in the land of Goshen. And they were enjoying their lives there. And they were being fed well there. And they had come out of the land of the Canaanites. And they were a cohesive unit in the greatest nation in the ancient world. Why would Joseph say, "Don't leave my bones when you go out of this place"? Why would they leave Goshen? Why would they leave Egypt? Why would they leave the blessings that they had in that country? The beginning of Exodus opens with these words. And there arose a Pharaoh in Egypt who did not remember Joseph, nor the deeds he had done. A Pharaoh arose in Egypt who said, "Who are these Israelites? Why do we have them, and why are there so many of them?" For the Israelites were soon outnumbering, the Egyptians thought, their own people. So this Pharaoh began to oppress them, turned them into slaves, and the Egyptians became their taskmasters. And he thought that by hard work he might kill them off or level off their population growth, but that didn't work. And so he instituted genocide, the destruction of the male babies in Israel. He began by telling the midwives who delivered the babies, "We want to know when the Israelite women are giving birth, and if it's a boy, you're to kill it. Deprive it of life and sustenance." Midwives wouldn't do that. It says they feared God more than they feared Pharaoh. So they said to Pharaoh, "These Israelite women, we can't get to them fast enough. We find out one of them's pregnant. By the time we get there, the baby's born and gone. They've carried him off." And then Pharaoh said, "Then my people will take charge of that." And the Egyptians began throwing male babies into the Nile, drowning the children. Amram and Jochebed appear on the scene in chapter 2 of Exodus, and they give birth to a baby. It's the only baby I know of in all the Bible that was, of whom it was said he was beautiful. I got to tell you, there are a lot of things that we just have to take by faith. But I've seen babies when they're first born. And I got to tell you, I don't know that I've ever seen a beautiful one. They all look like Winston Churchill, minus a cigar. But this baby was beautiful. And the parents loved him, and they thought they could spare him. And so they tried to hide him for a number of months. And when that didn't work any longer, because obviously he was getting a little noisier. They put him in a basket in the bulrushes of the river Nile and put his sister Miriam to watch what would happen with the basket. Now, the idea was not that they would just push him off, but I want you to think about the desperation of that move. Is there a mother here that would take a small infant, put it in a basket, and set it afloat in the water? Well, all that baby has to do is maybe turn over or just move the wrong way, or waves of a passing Egyptian ship knock that basket over and the baby's gone. And the bulrushes are worse. There are crocodiles in the Nile. Miriam watched, and now God's providence began to work. For the daughter of Pharaoh came down to the river to bathe, saw the basket, said to her women, go get that basket. When they brought it up, there was a baby. Now, you know, there are a lot of things that could have happened in that story. She could have said, it's an Israelite baby, throw it in the river. She's the daughter of the man who instructed them to do that. She could have said, it's an Israelite baby, somebody take it off. She could have said, put it back. But what she said was, I'll take it. And then Miriam came up to her and said, you know what, you need a wet nurse for that baby. I think I can find somebody. What a glorious thing that Jochebed got to be the nursing mother of her own child in the household of Pharaoh. They called him Moses. He was drawn out of the water, out of water. That's what his name meant. And as he grew up, I have no doubt at all that he began to be told by his mother, you are a chosen servant of the Lord God. You will one day deliver your people. Now, the reason I say that is because of what happened to him when he was the age of 40. Moses lived to be 120. His life can be divided into 3 sections of 40 years each. The first 40 years were spent in the household of Pharaoh, where he learned the ways of the Egyptians. He was one of them. The next 40 years were his exile in the land of Midian, where he learned God's ways and became a shepherd. And the last 40 years were spent with his people wandering through the wilderness to bring them to the edge of the promised land. Now, the scriptures tell us that at the age of 40, Moses saw an Egyptian taskmaster beating an Israelite slave. And he looked both ways, saw nobody there, and killed the Egyptian. Buried him in the sand. It says in the book of Acts, when Stephen is recording this event, it says, for he supposed that he would now deliver Israel. Moses evidently thought that if he would do this to the taskmasters, the Israelites would rise up and he would be their leader to rebel against the Egyptian household. But it didn't work that way. The next day as he was walking, he saw 2 Israelites fighting. And he said, brothers, don't fight like this. And one of them said, you going to kill us like you did the Egyptian? Now he knew the word was out. He went on the lam. Pharaoh was hunting him. And he was exiled. Sent out to the land of Midian. Now I want you to think about this man. He's 40 years old. He's had a sterling career as an Egyptian ruler. And now he's in the land of Midian. What's in the land of Midian? Sheep. Desert land. There's nobody to rule. There's nobody to exert power over. He has nothing to recommend him. He doesn't have a bank account to take with him. And he meets up with some Midianites there. And he ends up marrying a woman named Zipporah, who is the daughter of Ruel, a.k.a. also known as Jethro. For 40 years, God undid what Egypt had done to Moses. God taught Moses how to be the leader he wanted him to be. That he would not deliver Israel by the cunning and the power-hungry might of the Egyptian ways, but rather would deliver them by his own kind of leader, a shepherd. So at the age of 80, Moses is walking in the wilderness to watch sheep and sees a bush that is on fire. But what he notices is, though it's on fire, it's not being consumed. And he drew closer, and it was there that God commissioned Moses to deliver his people. Moses, go back. Tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And gather the Israelites. And Moses says, I'm not the person for that. It is interesting that of all the people in the Bible, Moses argues with God that he's not eloquent. Can you imagine that? God says, I'll appoint your brother Aaron, and he will be with you. When Moses got to the border of Egypt, Aaron met him there. God had sent him, and the brothers were rejoined. And then they went to meet Pharaoh. Let my people go, says the Lord God. And Pharaoh says, I do not know your God, and I will not let your people go. And then began the 10 plagues, those famous plagues on Egypt. The water of the Nile that was turned to blood. The frogs that came up from that Nile and covered everything in the houses of the Egyptians. The flies, the lice, or gnats, the hailstorms, the boils on the bodies of the Egyptians, the darkness that covered the earth. All these things that came one after another, and all the way up through the 9th one, Pharaoh was saying, I will not relent, I will not let them go. And then God said, one more plague, one more, the 10th one, and he will let him go after this one. I want you this night to celebrate a new feast called the Passover. In this feast, you are to eat this Passover in haste. You're to eat a lamb. You're to cook that lamb, and you're to eat all of it. And you're to have unleavened bread, because leavening takes time to work in bread. And you're to eat the bread as if it didn't have time to be leavened. Take all the leaven out of your houses and eat that flat bread. And so the Israelites were to eat that meal standing up with a staff in the hand and sandals on their feet. You may think, well, that doesn't seem that abnormal. My wife has always said to me, Ralph, if you ever opened a restaurant, I know what it would look like. It would just be a series of counters and sinks, and men could just eat over them. Well, that's my favorite place to eat, over the sink. Just eat. It doesn't seem that odd to stand up and eat, or to eat with your shoes on. But in that day, they ate with their shoes off, and they reclined to eat. So this is different than any other meal they've ever had. And it is very normal that the children would ask in generations to come, what does this mean, Father? And they would recite every year the memorial of their coming out of Egypt by the last plague, the death of the firstborn. And they were to take the blood of that lamb, and they were to paint the doorpost and the lintels above the doors. And God said, when I pass over the land and I see the blood on your houses, I will pass over your house and spare those who are within it. And thus its name, the Passover. But in the household of Egypt, there were no feasts, and there was no blood, until the death of the firstborn. In every house, every firstborn child died that night. The firstborn of the cattle died that night. They didn't keep household dogs, but if they had, the oldest dogs in every family would have died that night. And the wails began. And the houses, one after another, were lit as mothers ran to their children and saw the death of theirs. And even Pharaoh was touched by this. Death in his household. And so he said, send Moses out, take the people and get out of my sight. If I ever see you again, you'll die. And Moses and the people packed up everything they had. 600,000 men. If there's an equal number of women and possibly 2 or more children for each of those, we're talking about millions of people vacating Egypt overnight. And they left and went to the banks of the Red Sea. And when they got there, they looked behind them. And Pharaoh had changed his mind. He had 600 of his best chariots and a whole host of secondary chariots. And they were coming to bring back the slave nation. Now the Israelites at this point were not fighters. They had never trained in that. You can understand the Egyptians wouldn't want to train to fight. And so here they are, caught between an army that is coming from the west and a sea that is on their east, and they're caught right between those. And the people cried out to Moses and said, what? Were there no graves in Egypt that you bring us here to die? They're going to slaughter us. They're going to be so mad that we did this. Why did you bring us here? And Moses says to God, what do we do? And God said, stand still. And Moses repeated it, stand still and see the glory of the Lord, for he will deliver you this day. And raising his staff, the waters of the Red Sea rose up on both sides, forming a corridor, a wall of water, between which the Israelites began to move. Now let me just want you to think about this for a minute. Can you imagine the faith of the first Israelite to put his feet in that seabed? I mean, it's not like you see this every day. They'd never been to SeaWorld and walked through that tunnel of the shark place. They had never seen anything like that before. And the water is standing up. It's not like frozen. It's just standing up. And I got to tell you, if I had been an Israelite, you know what I could not have withheld myself from doing? Walking over to that wall and sticking my finger in it. You know, if you're like me, every time I go any place and they've got those water walls, I'm always sticking my finger in it to watch what happens underneath. I had to do that. And I wonder, were there fish in the walls looking at those Israelites as they went through the water? And down that great sea, the Israelites marched. What faith they must have had to do that. And as they went through and marched through that sea of water, it was standing up on both sides of them. The cloud that had separated them from the Egyptians lifted, and the Egyptians saw them and they salivated. Because now we got them. They are pinned in for sure. And they ran their chariots pell-mell into that water. And the Israelites came out the other side. And the Egyptian chariots began to lose their wheels and bog down. And the waters closed in over them and destroyed the army of Pharaoh. And the Israelites sang a song on the other side of the Red Sea. There are 2 songs there. Moses is a really long song. And Miriam had a really short refrain at the end of that. Now there are a couple of things about that I simply want to offer to you. There are people who say, well, those 10 plagues, those are just natural occurrences and they all just happened to occur when they did. I cannot believe that for a couple of reasons. First of all, because they end exactly when Moses says they'll end. When he says to Pharaoh, when do you want the frogs gone? Pharaoh says, tomorrow. And Moses says, good, tomorrow, they'll be gone. And they were. And if that's a natural occurrence, I don't know how they could have gotten all those frogs. I can't imagine Moses said to the Israelites, okay, we're going to have to work through the night. Everybody's got to grab as many frogs as you can and get rid of them. But the one that really floors me is the explanation that some people have come up with, that this isn't really the Red Sea. This was another body of water nearby called the Reed Sea. And the Reed Sea looks like a vast sea, but is very shallow. Very shallow. So the Israelites could have gone through that and just kind of paddled their way through that, walked through that. It would have been easy for them to get through the Reed Sea, and that's how they got away. Well, that explanation might explain it, but you got an even bigger miracle going on if it's the Reed Sea. Because how in the world do you drown an entire Egyptian army in 6 inches of water? Because they all died. I mean, did every Egyptian fall face first and gasp? Gone? And what about all the horses? Not a single horse was able to get up? No. This is a miracle of God that occurred because God was sparing his people. And so now God has them on the other side of the Red Sea. We're going to talk about what happens when they come to Sinai in just a few moments. And it's time to take our first break. I know it doesn't seem like we've been here that long. Please tell me it doesn't. And you can stand where you are after a couple of announcements from Greg.